Bugatti didn't think that we were going to be able to separate this car in half.
Can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment to be able to do that.
And put it back together.
Only 60 Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport hypercars exist. One was wrecked, written off, and left waiting for someone crazy enough to rebuild it, until Mat Armstrong took on the challenge. What he did not expect was Bugatti locking the car's VIN, cutting off every parts channel before he had even started. The factory's own quote to fix it ran close to $1.7 million. Then Bugatti CEO Mate Rimac stepped in personally to address the growing controversy. Was this about protecting safety or protecting control? Let's break down exactly what happened, from the salvage yard to the CEO's response, and see how this standoff actually played out. The hypercar that shouldn't exist. The story starts with a car that, by most reasonable measures, should never have been driven again. The Chiron Pur Sport belonged to a content creator who had put it through a serious accident.
So nobody believed that this was possible. Nobody thought that you could crash Bugatti, buy it back, and nonetheless fix it.
And the damage was significant enough that the car ended up listed on a salvage auction site. The kind of listing usually reserved for vehicles destined for parts, not the road. But this was not an ordinary car. Only 60 Pur Sport units were ever produced, making it one of the rarest hypercars in the world. And rarity has a way of attracting people who refuse to let something like that simply disappear. That is where Mat Armstrong entered the picture. What draws someone to take on a wreck that professional shops have already written off as a lost cause? Armstrong has built a reputation on YouTube for taking on rebuilds most professional shops would refuse outright. Cars written off, stripped for parts, or considered beyond reasonable repair. Is there a meaningful difference between restoring a rare classic and rebuilding a modern hypercar with components engineered to work only within a manufacturer's own closed system? As it turned out, the difference was enormous, and it had almost nothing to do with mechanical skill. Armstrong and his team took on the Chiron Pur Sport with the understanding that this would be one of the most demanding projects of his career. Hypercars at this level are not built the way ordinary vehicles are. Every component is designed around an extraordinarily narrow set of tolerances, and many parts exist in such small production runs that sourcing them outside official channels is close to impossible. That reality alone would have made the rebuild difficult. What made it far harder was a decision Bugatti had already made before Armstrong ever picked up a wrench. On paper, buying a wrecked hypercar out of salvage and rebuilding it looks like a straightforward, if expensive, engineering challenge. Assess the damage, source the parts, rebuild the systems one at a time. In practice, modern hypercar manufacturers do not simply sell parts to anyone who asks. They track vehicles by identification number, and when a car changes hands after a serious accident, that tracking becomes a gate rather than a formality. Armstrong's team would soon discover exactly how narrow that gate could be. Was the scale of the challenge clear from the outset, or did it reveal itself gradually as the project progressed? By most accounts, it was the latter. The physical damage to the car was severe, but assessing it was, at least, a known process. Inspect, catalog, plan. What came next was not a mechanical problem at all, and it would end up defining the entire project far more than any single broken component. What actually happens to a hypercar once an insurer decides it is no longer worth repairing? There is a broader context worth understanding before the rest of this story makes sense. High-value vehicles that suffer serious accident damage frequently get declared a total loss by insurers, at which point they are sold through salvage auction platforms rather than repaired through normal channels. a process that exists for ordinary cars just as much as it does for seven-figure hypercars.
I'm thinking a Bugatti not going to sell us parts for it, but they might actually sell us parts because there's no reason or no excuse on why they shouldn't sell us parts.
What makes a Pur Sport ending up in that pipeline unusual is not the process itself, but the rarity of the vehicle passing through it. Most buyers in that market are looking for parts cars or straightforward insurance write-offs. Almost none of them are looking at a car this exclusive and seeing a genuine, if daunting, restoration candidate. That is precisely the gap Armstrong has built a career filling. His channel has become known for exactly this kind of project. Vehicles other shops turn away, written off beyond what most professionals consider reasonable, brought back through a combination of patience, fabrication skill, and a willingness to solve problems nobody has published a manual for. That reputation is part of why this specific project attracted attention well beyond the usual pool of hypercar enthusiasts. A rebuild this ambitious, on a car this rare, was always going to be watched closely. What nobody fully anticipated was that the biggest obstacle would not come from the car itself, but from the company that built it. The blacklist that stopped the rebuild. Every Bugatti carries a unique vehicle identification number, and that number is tied directly to the manufacturer's parts and service network. Once the Chiron Pur Sport changed hands through the salvage process, Bugatti made a decision that would shape the entire rebuild. The VIN was locked. In practical terms, that meant no authorized Bugatti dealership anywhere in the world would sell replacement parts to support an independent repair. The car itself still legally belonged to its owner. Functionally, it had been cut off from the only parts network capable of servicing it properly. Why would a manufacturer restrict access to parts for a car it no longer owns? That question sits at the center of everything that followed. Bugatti's own explanation, offered later, centered on safety and complexity rather than simple restriction for its own sake. But the immediate effect was the same, regardless of the reasoning behind it. Armstrong's team would have to source, fabricate, or improvise almost everything the rebuild required, without the manufacturer's support. Is a VIN lock like this common practice, or something Bugatti applied specifically in this case? This kind of parts restriction is not unique to Bugatti. Manufacturers across the luxury and performance car industry track vehicles by identification number and can, in various forms, restrict which shops receive factory support for high-value repairs. What made this case different was visibility. Most of those restrictions play out quietly, between a manufacturer and a repair shop, with no public record and no wider audience paying attention. Armstrong's rebuild was different by design. He documented the process openly, which meant a decision that would ordinarily stay behind closed doors became something an entire online audience could watch unfold in close to real time. Once the team got the car apart, the scope of the damage became clear, and it was worse than a quick inspection had suggested. The gearbox housing had shattered. The transmission mounts showed two significant tears. There was structural damage to the monocoque itself, the central safety cell that most of the car's structural integrity depends on. Some of that damage came from components that are deliberately engineered to fail in a crash. Certain mounts and structural elements are built to break on purpose, redirecting impact forces away from the passenger cell and limiting harm to the people inside. That is a sound safety principle in a crash. It also means those same components can shatter from something as minor as a hard shunt, long before the rest of the car shows comparable damage, which helps explain why the repair list grew as quickly as it did. What does a team actually do
We've got airbags to fix, chassis damage to fix, and radiators as well. All of which we need to be able to source or repair ourselves.
Once it discovers the ground has shifted underneath a project already underway, discovering the blacklist mid-project changes the calculation for a team in a way that discovering it beforehand would not have. Armstrong had already committed time, money, and public reputation to the project by the point the parts restriction became clear. Walking away was not really a viable option once the car had been disassembled that far, which meant the team's only realistic choice was to find another way through, whatever that ended up requiring. Bugatti's own estimate for repairing the car through its factory channels reportedly came in at close to $1.7 million, with the likely need to split the car in two, given how extensive the structural work would be. Is that figure a reflection of the car's genuine complexity, or a number shaped by the fact that the manufacturer controls every part of the process end to end? Both explanations can be true simultaneously. Hypercar repair at this level genuinely is specialized and expensive, and a manufacturer with no outside competition for parts or labor has little external pressure to keep costs down. Armstrong, for his part, made clear that a bill of that size was simply not realistic for the project, which meant the independent route, however difficult, was effectively the only path forward. That difficulty did not stay contained to a workshop in the UK for long. As footage of the rebuild attempt began circulating and drawing attention online, it reached an audience well beyond the usual automotive enthusiast crowd, eventually reaching the desk of the one person whose response would turn this from a niche mechanical story into a public conversation about the entire hypercar ownership relationship. Mate Rimac breaks his silence. Mate Rimac holds an unusual position in the automotive world. He serves as chief executive of both Bugatti and Rimac, companies that, at the leadership level, now operate as a single entity. When Armstrong's rebuild attempts began generating real attention, Rimac addressed the situation directly, publishing a video statement rather than leaving the response to a press release or a spokesperson. In that statement, Rimac pushed back on two specific claims that had been circulating widely online. First, he addressed speculation that some of the car's more specialized components could be reproduced using three-dimensional printing, stating plainly that this was not the case. Bugatti's parts, in his account, involve manufacturing processes far beyond what home or small shop printing technology could replicate. Second, he disputed reports of Bugatti parts and service pricing that had been circulating in various online discussions, describing many of those figures as inflated or simply inaccurate. Is it possible for both a defensive corporate statement and a genuinely accurate correction to exist in the same message? It is. And separating the two required paying close attention to which specific claims Rimac was actually disputing, rather than treating the entire statement as either full vindication or full denial. How often does a chief executive personally step into a single customer's repair dispute? The fact that Rimac addressed this personally, rather than routing it through a public relations department or a written statement, is itself worth pausing on. Chief executives at manufacturers of this scale rarely engage directly with a single customer dispute playing out on social media, and doing so carries real risk. It elevates the story, confirms that leadership is watching, and puts the company's most senior voice directly on the record about a conflict that could otherwise have stayed a niche automotive story. That Rimac chose to do it anyway suggests the attention the rebuild had generated online had crossed a threshold the company felt it needed to address directly, rather than ignore. The pricing dispute in particular became something of its own subplot within the larger story. Online communities built around hypercar ownership had, for some time, circulated figures for Bugatti parts and labor that painted the brand as extraordinarily, almost punitively expensive to maintain.
But I can't just call up Bugatti to buy new ones.
So the car would have to be on site with ourselves, that new parts get ordered, you see.
So now I've got to figure out where all these parts come from.
Rimac's response did not deny that Bugatti ownership carries substantial cost. He acknowledged as much. But he specifically contested the accuracy of the numbers being shared, walking through several individual component costs to make his case. Whether that level of detail actually settled the pricing debate, or simply gave both sides new figures to argue over, depends on which corner of the online conversation one happened to be reading. Beyond the factual pushback, Rimac framed Bugatti's underlying position as one rooted in safety rather than obstruction. His argument centered on the extraordinary complexity of a car like the Chiron Pur Sport, the kind of vehicle where a repair performed incorrectly outside the manufacturer's own facility could create serious risk, not just to the car's performance, but to whoever eventually drove it. According to that framing, the correct path forward was for the car to be repaired at Bugatti's own factory in Molsheim, France, where the manufacturer could guarantee the work met its own engineering standards. That argument is not unreasonable on its face. Hypercars of this caliber genuinely do involve engineering tolerances that most independent shops are not equipped to replicate. Could a manufacturer offer a middle path, certified oversight without full exclusion, or does complexity at this level genuinely demand an all-or-nothing approach? But it also left an obvious tension unresolved. If safety was the primary concern, why lock a car out of parts access entirely rather than offering some form of certified, monitored, or partially supported independent repair? Rimac's public statement addressed the factual disputes around pricing and manufacturing methods clearly. It was less clear on that specific middle ground, and that gap is exactly where the next phase of the story took shape. A battle with no clear winner. Armstrong's response to Rimac's public statement was notably measured, at least in tone. Was that restraint calculated, given how much leverage a manufacturer like Bugatti holds over a project like his, or simply his natural approach to conflict? He has said he was genuinely surprised Bugatti's leadership was paying attention to his content at all. A small hypercar rebuild channel suddenly finding itself the subject of commentary from the chief executive of the manufacturer in question. He has also been clear his goal was never to provoke conflict. What he wanted, in his own account, was a workable alternative to a repair bill that ran into 7 figures. A bill that, by his estimation, made the project financially impossible through official channels. There is no way to verify motive with certainty, but nothing in Armstrong's public statements has walked back his commitment to finishing the rebuild independently. One detail worth treating carefully is a theory Armstrong himself has floated, that someone inside Bugatti, other than Rimac, may have influenced a shift in tone partway through the saga. This is his own speculation, offered as his read on the situation, rather than anything confirmed by Bugatti. It belongs in this story as exactly that, a stated theory, not an established fact. Public reaction split fairly cleanly into 2 camps, and both had a coherent argument. One camp sided with Bugatti's caution, pointing to the liability risk a manufacturer takes on when a repair performed outside its control ends up connected to its name. A poorly executed independent fix, leading to an accident, becomes a headline that damages the brand, regardless of who did the work. The other camp argued the opposite. Once a car is sold, restricting access to parts needed to maintain it crosses into an ownership rights problem that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. That argument did not stay confined to the automotive world for long. Debates over how much control a manufacturer should retain after a sale have played out for years in other industries. Consumer electronics, agricultural equipment, household appliances, under the broader banner of a right to repair. Does the company that built something retain the right to control who can fix it indefinitely, regardless of who owns it now? Watching that play out on a car this exclusive gave the debate unusual visibility, drawing in an audience with no particular interest in Bugatti, but plenty of interest in products they owned personally. Neither position fully resolves the other, which is precisely why the story held public attention as long as it did. Not a reckless mechanic versus an overprotective corporation, but a genuine disagreement between two reasonable positions, playing out in public, with real stakes on both sides. Who really owns a Bugatti? Standoffs like this rarely end with a clean, dramatic reversal, and this one was no exception. Over time, reporting on the situation indicated that Bugatti's position softened. The parts blacklist was reportedly lifted, and the company's repair estimate came down from its original figure. That shift did not erase the underlying disagreement about who should control repair access to a car like this, but it did remove some of the most direct obstacles Armstrong's team had been working around from the beginning. What actually changed Bugatti's calculation? The public record does not offer a definitive answer, and it would be speculation to assign a single cause. It is reasonable to note, however, that sustained public attention on a dispute rarely leaves a company's position completely unaffected, whatever the internal reasoning behind any specific decision. How much of a factory-built hypercar can genuinely be replaced with improvised or third-party components before it stops being the same car? Armstrong's team, notably, did not wait for that shift before continuing the work. Regardless of the official parts situation, the rebuild had already been progressing through improvisation and independent sourcing. The interior was rebuilt from what remained salvageable. New airbags were sourced from an entirely different manufacturer's parts bin.
The windscreen out and all of the deployed airbags. Everyone who's got an Audi A3, you have a Bugatti in the airbag.
Rather than through Bugatti's own channels. Custom radiators were fabricated to replace ones destroyed in the original accident. A new gearbox mount, one of the specific components engineered to sacrificially break in a crash, had to be addressed directly, given how central it had been to the extent of the original damage. Is a rebuild like this ever truly finished, in the sense of returning fully to factory specification? Probably not, and that may be beside the point. What Armstrong's project ultimately tested was not just whether a wrecked hypercar could be brought back to running condition outside official channels. It was whether a manufacturer's control over a car effectively continues after ownership has legally changed hands. That question extends well beyond this one Chiron Pur Sport, touching on a broader tension in the hypercar world between manufacturers protecting complex, safety-critical products and owners asserting a basic right to maintain what they have purchased. Does a public dispute like this actually change anything for the next owner facing the same problem? There is a precedent question worth sitting with here as well. Disputes like this rarely produce formal rulings or binding outcomes. No court decided who was right, and no regulator issued a new policy. What actually shifted was public pressure and visibility, not a legal or structural change to how manufacturers can treat parts access. That matters for anyone hoping this case settles the underlying question for good. It does not. The next owner of a wrecked hypercar attempting an independent rebuild would face the exact same uncertainty Armstrong did, with no guarantee that public attention would produce a similar softening a second time. The saga did not entirely end with the Chiron Pur Sport either. Armstrong went on to take on a separate, related project, an independent rebuild of a Bugatti Veyron, once again pursued against Rimac's stated advice that the work could not reasonably be done outside the factory. When that Veyron rebuild reached completion, Armstrong drove the finished car directly to Bugatti's headquarters in France to gauge the company's reaction in person.
All the damaged body panels off the car, the windscreen out, and all of the deployed.
Whether that gesture was read as a victory lap, a peace offering, or simply good content, it underscored how far the relationship between one independent mechanic and one of the world's most exclusive manufacturers had developed since a wrecked Chiron first arrived in his garage. The saga did not end with a tidy verdict for either side. Bugatti's underlying safety argument remains coherent, and so does the ownership rights argument on the other side of the dispute. What is clear is that a project which began as one mechanic's attempt to save a wrecked hypercar ended up putting a spotlight on exactly how much control a manufacturer retains over its own products, long after they leave the factory floor. A question this specific rebuild helped raise publicly, even if it did not fully resolve it. A wrecked hypercar forced a question no lawsuit ever settled. Once you buy something this complex, how much of it do you actually control? Bugatti softened, Armstrong kept building, and neither side ever fully backed down. The blacklist lifted, the estimate dropped. But the next owner facing this exact fight gets no guarantees. Only a precedent that pressure, not policy, moved the needle. Armstrong's Chiron may be back on the road, but the real story was never just about one car. If this changed how you see the fight over who really owns a hypercar, leave a like, drop a comment with your take, and subscribe for the next story.